pour over will, which is complementary to a living revocable trust. And the pour over will effectively acts as a net to catch any and everything that you haven't listed in your trust and push it back into the trust to be redistributed. And that's for folks that maybe they like bought a property one day and then they forgot to list it, and in the future is not there. Then it would catch that before, like as you go into probate, it would catch it and say, all right, this is actually going to go to these people here. The disadvantage, as I said, besides the fact that you have to go to court, and probate's one thing, one of the negatives about it is it takes about 8 to 12 months, but potentially even longer. I know that the Santa Clara courts are up to about 18 months nowadays to determine ownership of assets after a person passes away. So if you can kind of imagine like your assets that you want to go to somebody, you want, like after you pass, you typically want it to go to appropriately to the person that's supposed to get them. But just imagine if it took 12 months or 18 months to actually reach them versus taking like a couple months to get to them. So estate planning with a trust is much more advantageous than putting things just squarely through a will. And also that property that's owned in multiple states, you actually have to go through each and every probate court. So if you are a real estate investor, not just in the Bay Area, but also in like, let's say Kansas City, Missouri, or Florida, then you'd have to go probate at all the different courts. So other tools to avoid probate, there's joint ownership of property with the right of survivorship. I think we've all heard it, since this is a real estate organization, I'm sure you've all seen joint tenancy. That's a method to be able to own property together, but at the same time it has like a pre-built-in plan for asset distribution when one passes away. There's payable upon death instruments. So at a bank, you can structure your accounts so that once you pass away, then the person like that you have listed as your beneficiary, they can step forward and just collect those assets. And also you can transfer through gifts as well, but there's a limit upon the gift tax there. So this is a quick slide just to compare between a trust and a will, what each one can do. It, for the most part, reiterates what I had spoken about in the past, so I'm just going to give us a couple of seconds to take a look at this. But this is a very high level, like why a trust typically is better to structure than a will, but normally in an estate plan, or at least in the estate plans that we put together, we recommend having a trust and a complementary pour over will to make sure that you're that you capture all your assets. Okay. And one case study that I'd like to point out that it shows that some of the negatives of having a faulty estate plan and also not necessarily thinking through what you're planning to do is this case study of Marilyn Monroe. I know that this is a little bit older, but I think this is a pretty good example. So here, Marilyn Monroe, like as we all know, she was one of these icons in movie history. And as she, like while she was living, people don't know this, but she actually like ended up passing away in debt. And she obviously didn't have that many assets at that point. What happened though is that her intellectual property and all these other royalties and licensings, like of her image, came post death. And in her estate plan, she had planned for distributions to many different people, but one of them was to her acting coach. And in that plan, she had decided to distribute her residue, which is essentially any and everything else that she hasn't named for other people, to go to her acting coach. And if it wasn't to her acting coach, then to his wife, right? that that key phrase to his wife ended up resulting in a distant stranger receiving um, her licenses and her intellectual property. And the reason why is because, well, at that time when she wanted to distribute it to the acting coach and his present wife, she liked both of them, right? But unfortunately, after at some point, the acting coach divorced from his wife and married somebody else. And because he married somebody else, and then she passes away, then he passed away, then she passed away. Then what happened is that when her estate came and they were supposed to give it to the acting coach, they actually ended up, and obviously he passed away, but in the estate plan it said, oh, hey, to his wife. Well, his latest wife was somebody that she didn't know at all. So ultimately, this person that she didn't know at all ended up receiving about $20 to $30 million in intellectual property and royalties and licenses. And obviously, we may not all be Marilyn Monroe's where we have all these post-mortem intellectual property that grow in value, but it kind of goes to show, when you plan things and you want to make sure that they go to the person that you want them to go to, that's one facet of it. The other facet is that there were a lot of, there's a lot of scrutiny around this. This estate took 40 years to close because there are a lot of contests to the will, a lot of issues around it. And ultimately it went to this person. So that's just one case study there. Besides that, I just want to, we're kind of getting towards the end of the presentation here. Some of the items that I have not covered today and I can address pretty, so on a general level, are more asset protection techniques. So protecting assets from creditors, one can do so. But it depends on your situation. If you have I'm sure we're all aware of what LLCs can do, or what limited liability companies or corporations and so forth, how we can separate ourselves from our assets. Those are techniques that people are able to utilize today to protect themselves from potential creditors. Other parts are also just the creations of terms within your trust to be able to protect them from creditors as well. Irrevocable trust is something that we haven't covered today too. An irrevocable trust is effectively a trust or a plan that you decide to put together for the benefit of somebody else, and you put similar to the bucket analogy, where you have these assets that you want to put into the bucket, but instead of you maintaining control over it, after you put it in, you put the instructions in, you set it off, and this trust has inscribed rules that must abide by, and has a person that has to manage that. You may wonder why a person may want to do this. Well, it's because it can move assets out of your estate so that it reduces your potential taxable estate. But today, the potential taxable estate, so California doesn't have an estate tax. And on the federal level, our states, the federal estate tax is roughly, the threshold is if you have above $11.58 million in your personal estate, then you'd be subject to estate tax of about approximately 40%, roughly about 40%. But if you are married to a spouse, if you're married to a U.S., both of you must be U.S. citizens, but if you are married to a U.S. citizen, then from there, you can actually combine your amount, so 11.5 plus or times 2, when it comes to what assets that you can hold and or pass down and how you might be taxed. Now, other areas we haven't really talked about too much. We talked about pour-over wills, but not very deep into it. Complex trusts like special needs trusts, foreign spouses, ultra high net worth folks. Advanced Healthcare Directive, I just touched up on now. And it's how you decide you want to be taken care of if you cannot decide your own medical plans, like if you, for some reason, just like become like develop dementia or something along those lines, how you want to be taken care of there, and durable power of attorney is just the management of your finances. Besides that, just what to consider today: execution of an estate plan. Since most of us cannot, well, typically I usually meet with my clients face to face, but now I've been handling most of my clients via Zoom. But from there, we've been able to execute estate, like we're still able to put together estate plans, execute them, and there's also online notarization. And I know notaries today in California are working as well. The other part to consider today is just like advanced medical directive. Even though you may not be ready to put together a trust or a will, but you just want to get together like your medical directive to make sure that you're taken care of if you're unable to take care of yourself. That's something that I highly suggest you consider, whether it be with our firm or whoever it may be. Just these documents don't take very long to prepare, but they're very helpful for when for times when you are not able. Yeah. Besides that, so here's my contact information, and I will take any questions.
All right, perfect. Thank you, Aaron. Let's go ahead and get back to the gallery mode, and we can go ahead and proceed to Q&A.
Sure.
Okay. Awesome, guys. All right, let me look up the questions here.
And really quick, for those that don't know, this is Elena Wu LLP. This is our president-elect, and she will be helping us with Q&A.
Thank you. Thank you for the intro. All right, first question. Do I need to own a lot of assets, for example, real estate, in order to take advantage of estate planning?
No, you don't. And so one thing I want to point out is an estate plan isn't just these documents that you put together, but it's also like similar to what a financial plan is. It's like understanding what assets you may have, how you may want to distribute them. So if you like, let's say, there is that threshold of $166,000 where if you're under that threshold in terms of assets, then it is expedited. But even then, in terms of the process, but if you want to control where things go in the future, that's one way of taking advantage of estate planning. The other side is also, if you want to know, like just how to distribute things to people in the future as well, like not just inscribing it, but also, like, let's say banks enable you to have payable upon death beneficiaries. You work with your, like, same thing with retirement funds. So there's a lot of ways that estate planning can help.
Okay, great. What's my potential tax exposure if I don't have a trust in place?
It depends on the value of your estate. That's if you're above the 11.58 threshold, then you're subject to federal taxation at 40%. But if you're under that, then you should be, I mean, generally, if estates are under 11.58, then you're okay in terms of tax exposure, unless you have, well, it depends on what you're passing down. So like, let's say, and why. So if you have real estate and you want to pass it down to your kids, or to your, like, or even to your spouse, right? There's a step-up basis, so you can always, like, there's a lot of strategy when it comes to who you want to pass assets to. So there's like potential tax exposures there. On the other end, for retirement accounts as well, there's like required minimum distribution. So who you pass them off to may, there may be different tax implications there as well.
Okay, great. Next question. It seems a revocable trust does not protect lawsuit liability. Is this correct? And how do we add that?
Okay, so a revocable trust is effectively just an inscription of where you want the assets to go. So it doesn't necessarily protect against lawsuit liability, because all you're doing is like, again, creating this bucket, and you have these instructions. If you wanted to create potential protection from liability, well, you would want to have some type of limited liability threshold between you and that asset. So if you, let's say, let's say you buy, this is real estate. Let's say you buy real estate. You can put that real estate into an LLC where you own the LLC outright. So in that sense, you have this, you have protection from the LLC itself. And most folks think like, oh, well, what if I get like, what if the asset, I don't want to lose my asset, right? So people are always concerned about that specific, like looking at the asset on its own and like saying, oh, what if people sue that asset versus coming after me? Like you have to think about it also on the opposite end as well. What if people come after you, but they're trying to go after your asset? Like that, by having an LLC put in place, it makes it much more difficult to be able to pull those assets from you.
Okay, thank you. Definition of assets as in assets in the USA, correct? If I own real property in a different country, then living trust does not protect those non-USA assets, correct?
So this is one where it gets a little more complicated. You would want to check local jurisdiction regulations as well. I mean, you can inscribe things here, however, they'll still be subject to the regulations abroad.
Okay. Is a business trust a better structure than LLC for asset protection?
No, I'd say LLC is much nicer than, I personally prefer the LLC just because you have more control. And it tends to be a bit simpler to structure and maintain, depending on where you set up your LLC. So one thing that one should also consider is where they're setting up their LLC. If they set up one in, like, let's say, they set up one in California. Well, here in California, we require for folks to put their, like, their only, there's certain requirements here in California that may be more maybe more advantageous or more transparent to the general public. But if you go into other, but if you set up like trusts and LLCs in other states, there are laws where they don't necessarily require for you to put your names onto that LLC. Like if you go into, I want to say it's Wyoming and also Maine and North Dakota, where in certain areas you can actually establish trusts where you don't have, you can set up LLCs and trusts where they cannot and potentially will not figure out who you are or who owns that asset. And one thing that's actually pretty common, and this is something like if we truly want to talk more about assets protection, one that's very common is to put assets over into an island called the Cook's Island. And in the Cook's Island, they honor a lot of the stuff that we have in the United States, but at the same time, they will not honor lawsuits against you. So if lawsuits come against you and you have these assets in your foreign trust that's held within the Cook's Island, and all your assets are labeled there, well, well, if a lawsuit comes, they will not honor the U.S. Lawsuits, and they will not say, "Hey, you got to pay out this stuff." So, like, it all depends on the level that you want to go through. Yeah, it all depends on the level that you want to go through.
Okay, thank you. Next question. What happens when someone passes and they don't have a trust in place?
So
your whole presentation, basically.
yeah, you don't have a trust in place. It depends on how many, like what the size of your estate is. If your estate is above $166,000, then it goes through probate. Probate takes anywhere between 8 to 18 months, roughly. And also during that time, your assets are exposed to the public. So what happens, and I didn't really touch up on this, but when people pass away, like random people come out of the woodwork sometimes and say like, hey, anything owed to me. And when you have a trust, is much more discreet. Of course, there's still mandatory notices that you have to provide via the regulations, but on the other end, when you go through probate, or you have a will and you go through probate, and it itemizes, you'll have to provide an accounting of all your assets and where it's going to be distributed. There can be more will challenges there, or just estate challenges to your estate overall. So not planning ahead can lead to a prolonged distribution time. It can lead to more costs, and also people that you want to give the assets to, they may not even get the assets. So
Okay, thank you. Why should we hire attorneys if we can create these documents on LegalZoom?
Do you know how to do it? Because like it all depends. It all depends. Like for folks that want to, like, I'm not against doing things on more, potentially more efficient platforms. If you're not working with the appropriate professional, they may not be able to serve you in the best way. But it's like saying, would you want to like would you want to entrust your assets to someone that you may not, like, they're not really helping you, they're just organizing it for you. And as I mentioned earlier, there's a lot more to estate planning than just putting it into your trust. There's like the fullness of how things are going to affect your like, let's say, the tax liabilities in the future for your whether for your beneficiaries. There's also the implications that, hey, if you set up this trust now, is this the appropriate thing to do? Because let's say you decide, all right, I want to put a trust together, and my spouse is a non-US citizen spouse, and I'm going to name them as a trustee. Well, if you do that, then, and if they're not here, like in the United States in the future, now it's considered a foreign trust. All of a sudden, you have an elevated level of IRS scrutiny, and also your accountability has just increased like tenfold. So, and also your estate costs go up a lot. Like it could be as simple as talking to an attorney for 5 minutes to be able to determine, like, to save you a ton on what potentially could happen. But of course, I respect those that want to go via LegalZoom or other platforms that that they may say, oh, this is a little bit more efficient in terms of from the cost side, or also potentially from the time side. But you work so hard for what you've got. Like, do you want to save $500, $1,000, or but potentially subject that to a lot more liabilities in the future? Or do you want and just work with and on yeah to work with sites such as LegalZoom or others? Or do you want to kind of be sure that things are going to be handled? And also the other thing is, once you establish the relationship with the attorney, I talk to my clients all the time. Like they contact me when they have like bigger events that are happening. Similar to when you deal with your accountant, like there's a lot of planning that gets involved. So in terms of asset distribution, yeah, maybe you may want to control where maybe you're comfortable dealing with the LegalZoom. Maybe you read through the trust and you feel comfortable to what it says. But on the other end, like when you deal with estate planning, we're looking at the whole thing. So if you own a bunch of businesses, well, I'd highly recommend, if your estate is somewhat complicated, that you look at dealing with an attorney, not necessarily just going online.
Thank you. Aaron, let's see. How much do you charge for creating a trust, or does it vary based on quantity of assets, etc.?
So it's not necessarily quantity of assets, and the charges do range based upon whether it's an individual or a couple. If it's a non-US citizen like couple, if there are special needs, if they, like, let's say if you're ultra, like, super high net worth, but there are additional instruments and more complicated instruments that can help you save a lot more in the future. Then there are different levels of trust. And what I didn't mention earlier is that you have, on your broad term, your living revocable trust, but you have many sub trusts within them as well, so that you can potentially maximize the probate laws today. So it ranges, but for individuals, it's roughly between about maybe 1400 to about 1400 about 1800 or so, just for the estate plan, which would include living revocable trusts, will, and the healthcare and power of attorney. For couples, it'll range between $2,000 and about $3,000, maybe more or less. It depends again on how much, not necessarily the assets, but the amount of drafting and preparation that we have to do to fit that specific person's case and what they'd like to do. Yeah.
Okay. Do you do complementary initial consulting?
We do.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Next question. What value might a real estate professional gain by working with your firm?
Sure. So some things that we actually, so it'd be pretty surprising, but a lot of our folks that we work with, that, okay, you'd assume just because we deal with estates, you might say, oh, it's a lot, we deal with a lot of like older folks. What we actually have seen, especially nowadays, is an influx of people that are generally younger, not like 20s, but like 30s, 40s, 50s, like the full range of folks. And so when we've worked with real estate agents, like a good amount of people that we work with are in the real estate space as well, because it's just like, as we all know, real estate is one of those major assets, major purchases that your clients make. And a part of being able to service your clients is to understand, like, okay, well, you guys are buying this, buying these major assets, like, and potentially some of the times they are newer families. So our firm has been able to work a lot with realtors in terms of just arming them with like understanding, okay, if they buy a property, how does the estate planning work, so that they can effectively say, okay, hey guys, like if you buy this property here, you also may want to consider putting into a trust, have all your assets lined up, so you're effectively helping them not just like buy a home or sell a home, but what I kind of see real estate professionals as are people that help craft a way of life for folks that like or they help craft a way for folks as they grow their careers, grow their lives, and they help shape them. The way that we help real estate professionals is that we kind of help them with the understanding on one end. On the other end also, my partner, who unfortunately could not join us today, we also but we also deal with folks that work with maybe more sophisticated investors, where there's a lot more tax strategy involved in the structuring of LLCs or syndications, investment funds, and so forth. So understanding, like, okay, you have your typical person that's buying a property here today, or just like a home today, or you have somebody who's interested in buying like a large commercial space, developing it, putting construction into it, and so forth. We've fortunately been able to add a good amount of value there. And on the other end, a lot of people in the Bay Area tend to have generational wealth. By that, I mean, your parents may own real estate and they want to pass it down to you, and they may own many real estate properties. So understanding what to do, like in terms of property transfers, how to minimize potential like assessment taxes and so forth. We've been able to do that for folks in the Bay Area.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Aaron. That wraps up the questions for us. I want to announce that we do have our next event coming June 24 for ARIA Greater East Bay at 11 a.m. We're taking a dive into the state of the economy with Anthony Chan. There will be more details to follow in the coming days. And this webinar will be recorded and posted on our ARIA Greater East Bay Facebook page. Erin's information will be available for you guys to contact. And any last words, guys?
Eric, Aaron, and any final thoughts?
No, I just wanted to thank Aaron. He covered a lot of material on estate planning and why it's important, again, especially during these times when, people are passing and it's right in front of us. So thank you, Aaron.
Of course, yeah. And my last thoughts are thank you to all the panelists here. I really appreciate the opportunity to be able to speak to you and also speak to the folks that are in this webinar as well. If you ever have any questions, feel free to contact me.
Awesome. So Aaron, Eric, Elena, thank you so much for your time. To all our attendees, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule. Once again, stay tuned for our next event on June 24th.
Yeah, thank you.
Right.
Bye,
Thank you.
guys.
All right, take care,
Bye now.
guys.